Hello, my name is Carl Surrey and this is a video tutorial for two Facebook groups, fans of serif software and the Affinity Designer and Photo group. Now this is a second part of a beginner's look at using channels in Affinity Photo. It's not going to be expanding what I looked at in the first part that much, because as I said in the first video, I am learning this as I'm going along and hopefully passing on information to others who are also want to learn about Affinity Photo. So I have the same image that I used in the first part of the video, and which I got from Pixabay.com, and I will add the link to this in the description for this video. Now I just want to clear up a couple of things which I sort of didn't fully understand when I made the first video, and this was why there was like a composite in the channels tab. If it was a composite red, green, blue and alpha, and then a background red, green, blue and alpha, I didn't quite work out. I didn't notice that the name changed in this background section here to whatever the name of the level that is currently selected. So if I duplicate this layer here, the name hasn't changed here because the name is exactly the same because it's been duplicated. But if I rename this and make this copy, that is now changed to background copy, and if I click on the actual background layer, it will change back to background. So whichever layer is selected, you can alter from the effects in these four layers here, but if you want the effect to be from all the layers, you use the composite layers. So let me put this back to colour again. So that is why there are two sort of sections of red, green, blue and alpha. Now the other thing that I was struggling to sort of understand how it worked was if I right click, say this layer here, and I go to load to pixel selection, as you can see it looks like it's only sort of selecting certain areas, and I didn't sort of fully understand why it was selecting some areas and not others. So what I did was I had a quick look at the help files, and as it says here, you can create pixel selections based on a single channel or combination of channels, and these features are available from the channels panel. And pixels are selected based on the contribution that the chosen channel makes to the color value. If the channel only contributes partially to a pixel, that partial amount is selected. For example, when a channel contributes 20% of the color of that pixel, that 20% is selected. And then this section here says a selection marquee only appears around which is selected by more than 50%. Areas selected by 50% or less will not be displayed with marquee edges. So although all of the images sort of selected, only the areas that are above 50%, contributing 50% to that pixel's color, will actually be displayed. And this is how I read it and how I understand it. So although it looks like it's not selecting all of it, it actually is. A little bit confusing, but that's the way it goes. So what I want to do in this tutorial is show you three different ways, and there are only slight different ways of altering a picture. Let me just get rid of this selection area. Altering a picture in three different ways, and one's going to be like an infrared type image, one's going to be a sort of more colourful infrared, and the other one's going to be using the threshold adjustment. They're all very similar in their process, and I will go through each one separately. So first one we're going to look at is the infrared type image. Now, if this was like a new image, first thing I would do would be duplicate it, but I have already done this already, so we just work on with me that the fact that I've pressed Ctrl and J and I've made a copy of the background. And the next thing I want to do is from the second section of these red, green, blue alphas, whereas mine is now called background copy, you can select any of the red, green, blue, and if you just right click on that and then create grayscale layer, it will create a new layer above the background copy layer, which is just calling pixel, and as you can see it says here these have changed now to pixel because that is the current layer that is selected. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just change the blend mode near the bottom, and it is contrast negate. And that is that really. This is just a sort of a very easy sort of infrared image using the red channel from this background copy layer. So if I just do one or the other, I would just delete, let me select both those two and delete them. Now for this particular one you don't necessarily have to duplicate, I just do it out of habit because I like to keep my background protected, so I will just duplicate that, and I'm not going to rename it this time, but so it still has the same name, and this time I'm going to pick the background blue. I'll right click that, create grayscale layer, and then change the blend mode. I mean, you could pick any blend mode you want for for whatever sort of effect that you are trying to get. But for the purposes of my sort of infrared type image, I'm going for the contrast negate blend mode. So this one has a much darker sky area than it was when I used the background red layer. So that is how to use the channels to make a sort of infrared type image. So let me just once more delete those. Going back to my start image. Now this time we're going to move on to looking at sort of making a more colourful type of infrared image, which in all honesty could probably be much easier to get to by just sort of clicking on invert. Let me just press Ctrl and Z to go back to where it was. But that doesn't teach you anything about using channels, so I will just show you how I sort of got to a very similar place. And so again I will duplicate my background layer, and then I will just go with the blue background one this time, and then create mask from mask layer. Now you could just click and drag this and make this part of this background layer here. You then have to select it and then change the blending mode, and then again you can pick whichever one you want, but this time I went for negation. It's not quite similar to the invert look, but it is along those lines. So that is how I got to that effect using the mask. Now let me just delete that. and then I will duplicate it again, and then this time I'm going to use the red layer and then create mask layer. Now I'm doing this again because I just wanted to show you that, as I'm going to touch on a bit later about, I've made some macros for these. Now when you're making a macro, you can't sort of drag the mask down into the layer that you want it to make it sort of part of that layer. What I had to do was come to a layer menu and then merge down. So it's not technically part, as a group like it is when you've dragged the mask down into that particular layer, but it has the same sort of effect. And then come down to negation, and you have that effect. So if you're going to make a macro of it, or you'll be able to use my macros, which I will explain a bit later. You'd have to use the mask merge down option rather than making a sort of little mini group out of them. So that is how to do that. Let me delete this one, going back to our start image, and then the last one I want to look at is using the threshold adjustment layer. So again, I will duplicate, but this time I'm going to be using the composite channels rather than the sort of layer channels. Now one thing I did want to point out, which I forgot to mention earlier, is that when you right click either the composite layers or the actual layers, channels I should say, you get a different menu. And if I just right click this layers channel, so you have invert, clear, fill, create grayscale layer, create mask layer, and create spare channel. But if I right click a composite channel, you have the toggle visibility, toggle editability, load to pixel selection, add to pixel selection, subtract, intersect, and create spare channels. So depending on what you want to do, it will depend on which channel you select. So like I said, I'm going to be using the composite in this particular part of this video. I'm going to use the green one this time, so I will just right click and I'm going to load to pixel selection, and so we have our selected area here, and that will have loaded those pixels into the pixel selection layer, and you have a very small representation of what has been selected down here. And if I right click on that, I'm going to create a spare channel from that selection, and that spare channel is now been added to the bottom. So I can now press Ctrl and D to get rid of the selection area, which will then make that pixel selection just black because there's nothing in there anymore. So now I want the threshold adjustment, so I'll come to the adjustments panel, and the threshold is this one here. Let's just make it a very black and white image. You could make some adjustments at this point, but I'm not going to, because I'll show you that bit later about that. And then if you come back to the channels panel on the spare channel that you've made, right click that and then load to the threshold adjustment alpha. And as you can see, it has made this sort of picture image now just look like it has 3 or 4 colors in it. You can alter the threshold and have a totally different effect depending on what effect you are after, but I'm going to leave it in the middle 50% mark. And then that is the 3 different types of images that you can create using the channels. Now I will just delete this spare channel, and I'll come back to the layers, and I will delete the threshold adjustment, and I will use a different one this time. I'll try the composite blue one. So right click that, load pixel selection, and from the pixel selection create a spare channel. Press Ctrl and D to lose the selection, and then add the threshold adjustment, and then right click the spare channel and load to the threshold adjustment. Now the differences between using the red, green or blue composite are fairly minor, depending on your image. I would also depend if there's a lot of blue in it. Obviously using the blue composite channel will have a much more effect than say the green one, but again you can alter this to suit your taste. So that is the end of my look at using these channels. Let me just delete this, so I'm losing track now. Right, yes, using the channels to make 3 different types of effects. Now what I have done, let me just open up my macros and library. I have made 3 sets of macros using the red, green and blue channel to make the infrareds. So if I just quickly, let me just center this. If I use the red one, then press Ctrl and Z, that's the green one, and that's the blue one. I've also made 3 of the colourful infrared channels, image effects. So if I click on that one, and that's the green, and the blue, and then lastly I've made 3 again for the using the threshold. So that is the red channel, that's the green channel, and the blue channel. So as I said, they're very sort of subtle differences between which channel you select. Now I will be adding these 3 sets of macros into the file section of both the Facebook groups, and to load them into your version of Affinity Photo after you've downloaded them, you would need to go to the view menu and Studio, and then open, like put a tick on or click on macro to open the macro menu, and then repeat the process and come back and select library. And once you have the library open, this little icon up here, you click on that, it will open a little menu, and one is import macros, and there will be colourful infrared from channels, infrared from channels by Carl, and threshold effect using channels, and they are all .af macros. So that is how you can load them into your macro library, and they will look very similar to as they're here, and then you can just click on them to run them and add the effect to your images. Right, so that is the end of this part of looking at channels. I hope it has taught some more other beginners a bit more about how they can use channels. I will be trying to learn a bit more about how to use channels, and hopefully there will be a part 3. So thank you for watching, and goodbye.